Short stories. The hidden feelings of a wife.
Best Short Stories 2025. The secret hidden within each person. I was dreaming, and when the phone rang, I woke confused, still back in Saskatchewan on a hot summer afternoon, running down a dusty road toward my father, who was walking home, swinging his arms, quickening his pace when he saw me running out to greet him, wearing a smile both gay and tender, and the dream was mixed with the shrill ring of the phone, my father coming toward me, swinging his arms and smiling, and me beginning to stumble. James was turned away from me, his graying hair rumpled, the sleeve office pajama jacket twisted oddly around his shoulder as he spoke into the phone. "Oh no," he was saying. "Oh, God," then a pause and, "Yes, tomorrow 4 o'clock. Another pause. "Yes, all right then, Connie." "Yes. Till tomorrow." James' father had died. Another in the series of deaths that dogged our middle age, first my father, then his mother, my mother, and now his father, and now it would begin again, the travel, the pain and tears, the rituals, and all the same questions rising up to echo, unanswered, once more. "I'm so sorry, dear," I whispered. James had turned so that he was lying on his back looking up at the ceiling. I lifted myself on my elbow and saw that sorrow and resignation had crept into his eyes and settled in the lines of his face. At first I wasn't sure if I should touch him. I put my hand gently on his shoulder and began to straighten the twisted sleeve of his pajama jacket. He lifted his shoulder and arm to help me, then turned to me, leaning against me, and began to shake with those silent, agonized tears. "Men have Connie met us at the airport in Saskatoon, standing out in the crowd as she always did, thin and smartly dressed in a pale gold linen suit, her dark hair arranged in a chignon, but set apart less by her appearance than by a certain indefinable brilliance that clung to her, that was composed partly of tension and partly of a brittleness I always felt but couldn't comprehend. She had recently gone through her third divorce." James and Connie hugged briefly and brushed each other's cheeks. Grief, for he had loved his father deeply, had made James tentative, blurred him as if he too might melt away, was only waiting, hovering in a confused way till things came clear to him, while Connie vibrated with some barely controlled, unacknowledged emotion that was not, couldn't be, sorrow. "Poor Dad," James said to her, blinking, holding her hands, and Connie said, "Yes," in a harsh voice and looked away, standing in that small, crowded airport as we waited for our luggage, making disjointed small talk about the flight and the heat. I remembered that in the dream and in the actual waking moment too, I also had loved my father. I was about 8 years old then, and I had loved him unconditionally. In the end of the dream, as the phone woke me, I had been stumbling. Yes, of course, one day when I was not even out of the yard, I stumbled over a stick and fell headlong on the path. The stick had a rusty nail in one end and it cut my ankle in that soft, fleshy part on the top of my foot, just below the shin, and there was blood everywhere, and always on the edge of panic as a child, terrified at the blood. I turned away from my father and ran screaming into the house to my mother. Then, because the ankle became infected and refused to heal, I had to go to the hospital, where I stayed for over a week, running a fever the whole time, in constant pain, while they gave me antibiotics, and soaked my foot twice a day in an antiseptic bath that was so hot I could barely stand it. After a week of lonely misery, lying silent and bundled up in the bed as if it were blizzarding outside, although it was the height of summer, my ankle still not healing, the doctor scooped me up in his arms, carried me to an examining room by the ward office, gave me a whiff of anesthetic, the memory of which still sends a little shiver of fear down my back, and when I woke I was back in my hospital bed and my mother was sitting beside me smoking. I remember how she made a little drawing on her pale blue player's package of the sliver of wood the doctor had removed from deep inside the cut. Then I went home to find that I was so weak from lying in bed that I could barely walk. And it seemed to me, although I would never know this for sure, that I never again ran out to greet my father as he came home. The luggage began to tumble from the opening onto the belt. James moved forward, jostling my arm, to pick up our suitcases. "This way," Connie said, leading us toward the exit to the parking lot as if she thought we'd never been in the Saskatoon airport before. She had been in the city a week, ever since their father's first heart attack. She could do that because she didn't have a job, her divorce settlements having left her secure. We stepped through the sliding glass doors and were immediately enveloped in the baking prairie heat. When James saw that Connie was driving their father's car, a 15-year-old blue Bic from the era of big cars, still in mint condition, tears came into his eyes. He blinked them back, then set the suitcases in the trunk Connie had opened. But when he had laid them inside, and the trunk was closed and Connie was opening the door on the driver's side, James paused, lifted his eyes from the car, and stared around at the few trees stunted by the jet exhaust and then up at the huge, hot prairie sky. "I thought we had more time," he said. "I did too," Connie said briskly, "but more the fools us." She got in the car and slammed the door. "James didn't move." "James," I said softly. He turned his head slowly toward me, smiled vaguely, then got into the front seat beside his sister, while I got in the back. "It was sudden, James," Connie said, as she put the car in gear and backed it out. "He didn't feel a thing. And the attack that put him in the hospital was a mild one. He didn't suffer much." She said this not in a comforting way, although I believe it was her intention to comfort him, but angrily. Did she not love their father? I wondered. Had there been trouble between them? If it was so, James had never mentioned it. He often talked about his father in a warm, loving way, what a good father he had been, how understanding, how supportive, and how close they had been. I had assumed Connie had been included in this, and I had envied both of them. Connie paid the toll, then drove us out of the parking lot and into the light traffic moving away from the airport. "I waited for you to come to make the arrangements," she said. "Are you up to stopping at the undertaker's right now? He needs to see us, the sooner the better." James gave a little start. He turned to look at Connie, and then the surprise faded and was replaced again by that deep sadness. Connie kept her eyes on the traffic, refusing, I thought, to look at him, and there was such tension in her neck and shoulders that I thought I had better act as go-between. "What do you think, James?" I asked, leaning forward. The leather of the seat still had a faintly new smell when you came close to it. "Yes, sure," James said, and I was grateful to hear the steadiness that I loved in him returning even under his shock and sadness. He would suffer, I knew, was suffering, but he would be all right. Connie changed lanes, moved out into the more congested lane of traffic going downtown, still not even glancing at James. She drove aggressively, angrily even, and looking at their backs, brother and sister, in the seat in front of me, the one tense and dark, the other fairer, relaxed into his sorrow. It seemed to me that a conflict was inevitable, although why or what about I did know, and I prayed that when it came, if it came, it wouldn't be too bad. They talked to each other in low voices about other family members who had still to be called, and about the neighbors and their father's friends, reminding each other of this person or that. My mind drifted and I watched the cars pass us, and the buildings, altered now by time, that had once been so familiar to me. We drove with the windows down since the car, despite its luxurious interior, didn't appear to have air conditioning. I rested my arm on the open window, and as we waited at the stoplights I could feel the reflected heat rising in waves off the asphalt. I was suddenly back a teenager in this city, waiting at bus stops on my way home from the swimming pool, going out on date summer evenings to movies downtown. I couldn't recall my father ever meeting or talking to one of my boyfriends. I couldn't even recall one of them in the same room with him. And yet, the night before my wedding to James, he flew into one of his rages, starting out in a mildly accusing way because I was marrying out of his church, and when I didn't try to placate him, his voice began to rise. He played off his own outrage, used it to let out all the unexpressed anger he had been hoarding over my neglect of him as my father and my turning away from him. I cried, after he had worn himself out as he always did eventually and had gone to bed, standing out on the dew-dampened front lawn in the thick summer darkness. It was late then, after midnight, and I was to be married to James the next morning. I thought how I would be gone the next day, gone for good. The neighborhood was very quiet, except for the sound of distant cars that rose to a hollow whine over the treetops and houses. All the time I was crying I could hear the sound of those cars, people going and coming to movies and parties or dances on that Friday night. I was filled with pain, seeing no end and no solution to my unhappiness except through the act of leaving for good. And I was unable to say even then, riding in Jane's father's beautiful old car down those familiar streets that I now wished not to be on, of what my feelings consisted. I cried over the impossibility of fever turning it all simple again as it must have been when I was 8 and loved my father unconditionally. By 10 that evening all the callers, neighbors, friends, a few relatives, had gone home and the three of us were left alone in the comfortable, once elegant living room. We had opened all the windows and doors to the prairie night, hoping to catch any breeze that might come up, and it seemed to me that the warm outside darkness had a gentle hum to it that might slowly seep into the shadowy room where we sat in silence, was held in abeyance only by the fragile skeleton of the house. Funny, I feel so little, Connie said. James didn't say anything and I tensed, hoping Connie would not go on in this vein. I never felt I had a father, she said, holding her glass of whiskey up to the light. I guess it's no wonder I don't feel much. I could feel James closing himself off from her, turning inward, refusing her invitation to quarrel, trying to take the tension out of the moment. I took Connie's remark as a casual one, as if I didn't know how loaded with emotion it was. I felt the same way about mine, I said. But now, years after his death, I find myself thinking about him, missing him, in a way I never do, Martha. My father didn't love me, Connie said, not looking at either of us, her mouth twisted. She quickly got control of herself. Don't tell me yours did he love you either. What is it with these fathers and their daughters? James stood slowly, a big, rumpled, tired-looking man, his expression carefully neutral. I'm going to bed, he said, in a mild tone, as if he hadn't heard what had been said. Good night, and he went out of the room. Connie watched him walk away, then kept her eyes on the wall as if she could see through it. Here we could hear him moving slowly up the stairs. Her eyes were very bright now and fierce. I yawned and stretched, intending to follow James as soon as I decently could. For a long day, I said. I'm tired. I'm not, Connie said, abruptly, almost rudely. I don't know how the hell I'm going to sleep tonight. I'm wide awake. She stood abruptly and moved into the armchair that James had been sitting in, that had been their father's chair. She leaned back, then put her arms carefully out on each armrest as if she were trying it out to see if she would buy it or not. Keep me company for a while. After a moment I said, I've been thinking about my father, how I loved him when I was 8 and when I was 10 I was already turning away from him, till when he died we were barely acquaintances. At least you had a father till you were 8, she said. I never had my father. He was wrapped up in James. All he needed was a son. He never knew I existed. Her anger was palpable, throbbing around us. At last it knew what that barely contained emotion I had been feeling in her since she met us at the airport was. It was rage, and now he's dead, Connie said, her tone fluctuating between bitter and wry. I'm the one who'll be stuck with going through this house deciding what to do with everything. James won't be any help. I'll help you, I said, if you'll allow me. She was silent, and I was too, wondering if it was true that her father didn't love her, suspecting that it was since James hadn't even bothered to deny it, wondering if my father had loved me when he died. I had no idea. I doubted it. The will be fair, you know, Connie said. Her voice had deepened and she looked directly at me. I felt it was the first time the real Connie had ever spoken to me. It will be scrupulously fair, but somehow she looked away, her mouth working, trying not to cry. Fair hurts even more. Then she shrugged and lifted her eyes to me again, the tears gone. Silly, isn't it, at my age? But what could he do now anyway, to make up for all those years of benign neglect? At least it was benign, I thought, but decided not to say it. The air between my father and I had been so charged that I didn't like being in the same room with him, and he knew it, and was uncomfortable around me, so how we avoided each other. Or was it only that I avoided him? I had a bad relationship with my father, I said. But it was as much my fault as his. He was a good father, she asked quickly, fastening those brilliant eyes on mine. I don't think so, I said. I doubt it. I looked away from her. But Hugh is only an ordinary man, you know. He wasn't anything special. He did what he knew, that's all. I don't blame him so much anymore. Or at least, I blame myself as much. You were only a kid, Connie said indignantly. Kids aren't supposed to know what to do. Adults are. I leaned back against the sofa and sighed. I wanted to ask her, you're an adult, do you know? Connie sat in her father's chair with her eyes closed. There was no sound from upstairs. Moths bumped softly against the screens. Let me tell you something I did, I said. It was the first thing that I can remember doing against him. When I was 10, I started to get sick. I'd catch a cold, it would get worse and worse, I'd run a fever, I'd develop a pain in me side, and then I'd be sent to the hospital. The doctor could cure me with antibiotics, but he couldn't figure out what was causing the trouble, so that winter I was in the hospital 3 or 4 times for a week each time. Across from me Connie sat motionless, pinning me with her large, dark eyes. I shifted my eyes to my knees. You know, I came from a big family, and my mother was busy and overworked, so when I got sick she would make a bed for me on the cushion, the living room, where she could keep a close eye on me, and so sure wouldn't he have to keep running upstairs. At night my father would carry me to bed. One night, I think it was my 2nd or 3rd bout with this sickness, and it was just before I went back to the hospital and I was feverish and suffering with a steady, dull ache in my side, my father came and picked me up gently in his arms. We lived in a small, crowded house, and when he moved from the living room into the hall he had to change directions with me in his arms to go around the newel post to start upstairs. He had to dot his carefully in that cramped space so as not to bang me up against it. This particular night when he rounded the newel post, I cried out, and my mother came from the kitchen angry with him and criticized him for not being careful enough with me. And he said to her, he was hurt and puzzled, they hadn't even touched the newel post. I lifted my eyes to Connie now. She was still staring at me, frowning now, listening intently. I was a little embarrassed and began to wish I had never started the story. Do you know, he hadn't touched the newel post. I faked the whole thing. Why did you do that? Connie asked. I shrugged, looking for attention. I guess, I said, deciding in that instant not to tell her anything about the dynamics of our family. She was silent, thinking, but he would never have known that you'd faked it, she said. It shouldn't have affected his attitude toward you. But the point is, I said, why did I do that to him if I loved him? Suddenly I knew the answer, something I'd been secretly puzzling over 4 years. I opened my mouth to say it out loud, then held back. My poor father, eternally caught between my mother and me. Oh, who knows? Connie said, suddenly impatient, her anger returning. My father used to take James hunting. He wouldn't take me. I asked him if I could go, but he just laughed and said girls didn't hunt. All that stupid stuff that was typical of that time. And he coached James' soccer team for a couple of years too, but he never did anything with me. Christ! I can't remember ever doing something with him, just the two of us. Not ever in me whole life. I can't forgive him for that. I don't think I can remember being alone with my father either, I said, a little surprised at this realization. We were silent for a time, listening to the soft hum of the summer night. I still dream about him, I said. The funeral was a typical, simple ceremony, so smoothed out by the funeral director's craft that there was no way to tell that it was James and Connie's father's funeral except when his name was mentioned and the details of his life recited. I liked James' father. He was once a big man with a gentle air and a sort of distance to him that I was beginning to see in James. I thought of the big room below us full of empty coffins, caskets the funeral director had called them, with price tags placed discreetly on the quilted satin interiors. The departed one. It saddened me that his funeral was so smoothed out, so homogenized. I pictured us dancing around a fire, screaming and crying, throwing spears, drawing blood, and for an instant I felt better. But James' grief got the better of him, and when he broke down and sobbed, Connie handed him her hanky without even looking at him. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask, her lips tight, her hands pressed together in her lap. I felt more sorry for her than I did for James, because Hugh is at least able to get some satisfaction out of his grief, knowing as he did that he felt as he was supposed to. I thought about Connie saying that she hadn't one memory of doing something with her father, and that I had agreed. But I had suddenly remembered that once my father took me fishing. One summer our parents packed us and half our household goods into our old car and took us for a holiday at a lake not far from the city. We stayed a week, crowded into a rented, one-room cabin with a toilet out back in the bush, and every day my father went fishing. One morning, I don't know how it happened, but he took me with him. I remember creeping out of bed very early when everyone else was still asleep, and the two of us going out into the bright morning. He rowed us in a rented rowboat out into the middle of the lake where we stopped, and he baited my hook with now. Then I trailed my line in the water while he cast. After a while I felt a tug. I was very excited, and with my father's help, I reeled in a small fish, a perch. I think when we got back to shore, my father having failed to catch anything, I raced up to the cabin to show my fish off. Then my father, not my mother, lit a fire in the cookstove and fried my fish. And the two of us alone ate it for our breakfast. But even though it was the only fish I ever caught in my life, and my only memory of being alone with my father, no matter how hard I searched, it didn't feel like a special happening. It lacked the feel of intimacy and the tender joy such memories are supposed to have, and I couldn't understand why. The following morning we began to clean out the house, to ready it to be sold. I was surprised at how well James lent himself to the enterprise, seeming even to enjoy it a little. The three of us traipsed down the stairs to the musty, badly lit basement. "You go through that closet, Carol," Connie said to me. "It's only old clothes and I think it can all be thrown out, but if you see anything fit for the Salvation Army, put it in a separate pile. I'm going to go through this junk." She nodded to one corner of the basement that was piled high with rolled-up rugs, broken chairs and small tables, floor lamps without shades, neatly closed dusty cardboard boxes and scarred, dust-covered suitcases. James watched her. Connie didn't invite him to help her, and after a second he went to the opposite corner where the old water heater stood and a set of cobwebbed shelves laden with objects made mysterious by their covering of dust. Connie began pulling out a broken wooden chair which fell apart in her hands, the pieces rattling against the cement floor. She sneezed when the dust flew out of a couple of faded scatter rugs as she pulled them down and tossed them behind her. "Well, for heaven's sake," she said. James and I stopped what we were doing to come and see what she had found. She crawled over the suitcases, pushing them out of the way, and threw back the last corner of the sheepskin rug that had been covering the tall cabinet with the murky glass doors standing against the wall. "It's Dad's gun cabinet," James said. Connie rattled the doors, trying to pen them. "Let me," James said, and pushed more boxes and suitcases out of the way till he reached her. She stood aside, he bent, did something with the latch, and the doors opened with a squeak. It seemed to me there was an unnatural silence in the basement as James reached in and lifted out a long-barreled gun. He fingered it for a moment, rubbing his palm along the scarred stock, then said to me without lifting his eyes from the gun, "It's Dad's old 12-gauge. I used to hunt ducks with him. He let me use it." He lifted the gun to his shoulder and sighted down its barrel, then swung the barrel in an arc as if he'd sighted birds, one eye screwed shut. "Oh, for God's sake," Connie said. "Here, let me." He looked a little surprised, but took it down from his shoulder and handed it to her. I expected her to sight down its barrel too, but she didn't. She merely held the gun in front of her as if she were waiting it, then abruptly she let go, put one hand to her face. She did it so quickly that the gun overbalanced and would have fallen to the floor if James hadn't caught it. They stood for a second, not quite looking at each other, the gun between them. It sure needs cleaning, I said. Dad used to keep it clean, James said. I guess he lost interest in duck hunting after Mom died. It looks old, I said. The gun had a handmade look about it, compared with the few guns I had seen with their gleaming barrels, sleek, polished wooden stocks and lethal-looking, streamlined breeches. It belonged to his father, James said, taking it back from Connie and rubbing at the engraved patch on the breech using his handkerchief. And now, I guess it's mine. He broke the breech and peered into its workings. I could feel Connie suddenly become alert at this, as if it hadn't occurred to her that this object wouldn't be given away or thrown out like the others. But she didn't speak, and because James didn't either, I said, my father never hunted. I can't remember even hearing him talk about hunting. The thought of my gay, sensuous father going out to hunt in the cold fall mornings struck me as incongruous. He liked dances and parties for recreation. He liked to sit in the bar with his friends. He liked talk best. Only fishing sometimes, that was the only thing he did. It was his arthritis, James said. He had to give up most things after his arthritis set in. His voice broke and he cleared his throat. He managed pretty well after Mother died, Connie said. Once he got a housekeeper. Their father had always been going to move to an apartment in a month or so, or in the spring, but 5 years had passed and now he had made his final move. He isn't suffering anymore, James said, and I thought he would cry. I'm glad to have his gun. Again I felt Connie tense, less suddenly this time, but again she didn't say anything. I felt myself irritated with her, although guiltily so, reminding myself that she had just lost her parent, but when my father died he had nothing. There was nothing to quarrel over. Their tiny house that wasn't even paid for went to our mother, and other than that, and his old car which went to a teenage nephew for a jalopy. He had lived his life without acquiring anything of value, sentimental or otherwise. Is that sad? I found myself wondering. Did I know that? Did he care? Was it deliberate? Thinking of his old car reminded me of the time he offered me a ride to school that I didn't want to take because I wanted to walk with my friend, but he insisted that I go with him, and I knew if I refused he would have given me one of his accusing glares. He would complain about me to my mother, and then he'd stomp out of the house and slam the door. So, to avoid the fuss, I consented to be driven. It was early fall. It had rained the night before and then frozen, so that all the city streets were coated thinly with ice. My father drove slowly, and it was early enough that there was hardly anybody out. He stopped at an intersection only a couple of blocks from home, and a woman coming up behind us misjudged the slipperiness and ran into us. My father got out. He thought there would be shouting and swearing, but there was none, and when he got back into the car, thinking somehow that this was a reprieve, I said I'd walk the rest of the way. He became very angry and growled at me and glowered and would have shouted, but I said, okay, quickly. We drove the rest of the way in silence, and I was half an hour early for school. It took us 3 days to finish cleaning the house and to make the arrangements for the disposal of the furniture which was sold to an agent and for the house, which was going to be handled by a realtor. We had packed the dishes and the bedding and the personal items and had made arrangements to have them shipped either to Connie's home in Montreal or to ours. There was nothing more to be done. James and I were in the guest bedroom packing. Our suitcases were open on the double bed and the room had been stripped of knickknacks, bedding and curtains. Connie knocked on the door. Are you finished packing? I asked her. Not quite, she said, in a tone that made even James look up. Now I was the one to tense, seeing the expression on her face. She was dressed for travel in a white suit, her hair was up, formally arranged in a chignon again, and her makeup was fresh, but masked like it was so thick. She lifted her hands and placed them together at her waist like a choir girl. Her heavy gold bracelets clinked dully. I want Dad's gun, she said. What? James said. I want his gun. It lay on the bed above our suitcases, its long, heavy double barrels corroded and dirty. The leather padding at the end of the stock was worn through and the stuffing was spilling out onto the mattress. The breech and its workings were black. It was a very old gun. You don't hunt, James said. Neither do you. Yes, but, James began, then looked at me. When I said nothing, Hugh went on, I used to hunt with Dad all the time. His hands went to the gun and then he was lifting it, putting it to his shoulder again, sighting along its barrel. I remember the first time I fired it. I accidentally shot both barrels at once and the recoil knocked me flat on my back. You should have seen the bruise I had on my shoulder. I thought I'd broken it. I realized he was talking to me, but he was looking at Connie, pleading silently with her. She took a couple of steps toward him, her expression not wavering. I think it rightfully belongs to me, James said stiffly. Connie said, I want it. She did not say, both of you owe it to me, although it seemed I could hear the words between them. After a moment James set the gun carefully against the bed, it's but resting on the floor. Connie went out of the room. When we were finished packing, James took the suitcases and the smaller bags and we started out of the room. I hesitated a moment, looking at the gun, but James didn't turn or look back. Connie wasn't in any of the rooms we passed and she wasn't downstairs. We went out to the car and James began to put the cases in the trunk of his father's car, which it had been decided we would drive home. When we got it there, James would sell it and divide the proceeds with Connie. When Hugh was done, I said, James, what about the gun? He slammed down the trunk lid, then stood still, looking down at the pavement. Dad always said it would be my gun one day. He turned away from me and leaned, chest first against the car, his arms extended over its roof, and looked down the street of his childhood, squinting as if to see better. Asmal boy leaving in the early morning with his father, putting guns in the trunk, the neighborhood still asleep, the birds just beginning to stir, the sun appearing over the horizon. He turned back to me and took my hand. Don't worry, he said. I always knew something like this would happen. Together we went back into the house. As we entered, Connie was coming down the stairs. Behind us, as James shut the door, there was the roar of a big truck pulling up in front of the house. After a second we could hear a truck door slam. Goodbye, Connie, James said. He waited for her to reach the bottom of the stairs. Someone began walking up the sidewalk briskly. Goodbye, James, Connie said evenly. I thought they might embrace again, but although Connie was right in front of him, they merely looked at each other. There was a knock on the door behind us. I opened it to find a husky young man in coveralls standing there. Movers, he said. Could you move those vehicles out of the driveway? Yes, right away, I said, and shut the door. James and Connie were still facing each other. Goodbye, Connie, I said. I hope to see you at Christmas. She put her hand out to me. I took it, we brushed cheeks, and I turned back to open the door. James murmured, bye, again, not looking at Connie. The driver off truck beeped the horn twice, reminders to us. I looked back at Connie as James stepped out onto the sidewalk and saw that her face was still a careful mask. Her eyes flickered to mine, but I could tell she'd barely noticed me. Other things were on her mind. I followed James outside, pulling the door shut behind me. We got in the car and drove away, leaving Connie, as we had arranged, to supervise the movers. We had gone 100 miles when James said to me, lifting one hand from the steering wheel in a gesture of relinquishment, I wonder what she'll do with the gun. Neither of us could imagine it in her smart Montreal apartment. Yes, I wonder, I said. But thinking about it, I imagined that she would not take it with her, that she would leave it behind in one of the empty rooms of the house. I imagined, too, that it would cost her much to do that, but that she would not regret it. The last time I saw my father alive it was early winter, and though there was no snow on the ground yet, the mornings were cold, the ground frozen hard with a covering of frost on it before the sun rose high enough to melt it. I was walking to my secretarial job on the university campus. To get to my office I had to pass the university hospital and all its satellite buildings and the parking lot for outpatients at the cancer clinic. The chilliness and the layer of morning frost had dulled and softened the outlines of the city that could be seen across the wide river. That is how I remember that morning, softened and faded, still as in a prophetic dream. As I approached the entrance to the parking lot, I saw a man walking slowly toward me. A few more steps and I saw that he was my father. When we met, we both stopped. He was out of breath and I thought, had to stop tourist before he went on to his car. He had been a laborer all his life, but when he was not wearing his work clothes, he always dressed formally, and now he was wearing his good black overcoat, a neat, small black felt hat and a fringed, white silk scarf tucked around his neck. His color wasn't good, there were red spots on each cheekbone that had never been there before, but what struck me most was a gentleness that appeared in his face when he saw it was me. We spoke, but we had so little to say to each other that I have no memory of our words. It was too chilly to stand for long, and he was worn out by whatever they had done to him at the cancer clinic and needed to get to his car so he could sit down and then drive himself home. I watched him walk away slowly in the still, frosty morning, then went on to work, but, reflecting on that meeting now, long after it took place, I knew he had looked at me in the way he had when I was a child, when we had loved each other without conditions or reflection. The paleness of the morning, the chill, the tender way he held his mouth. Thank you for watching the video. If you find it interesting, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.